Yeah, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make a short presentation on a Swiss law topic on the new marketing rules for private equity funds in Switzerland. It's a pity we can't meet in person, but in the case you have any questions after my presentation, please contact me. At the end of my slides, you will find my contact details, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions which you have. You may have heard that actually the legal landscape on the distribution or offering of funds in Switzerland has changed. It has changed quite a lot. I first of all want to give you a brief overview of actually what's the timeline. The change became effect on the 1st of January 2020, so it's brand new. But we have this transition period of 2 years. So that means we have now a 2-year period during which you have the chance to switch from the previous regime to the new regime. On the top, I just mentioned 2 words. Distribution. Under the previous regime, we referred to distribution or distributing activity, and under the new law, we just refer to offering or offering activity. So you will just realize that I will not use anymore the term distribution, but I will rather use the term offering. But at the end, it's more or less the same when we look at these rules. As you see, when you look at the dates, at this moment, we are in 2020, then we have the transition period 2020-21, and then from the 1st of January 2022 on, you will have to apply the new rules. Now, during this transition period, that means during the year 2020 and 2021, you can decide at any point in time when you want to switch from the old regime or from the previous regime to the new regime. It's absolutely up to you to decide when you want to switch. The only point is, when you switch, you have to switch entirely. You cannot say that you want apply the rules which apply to the funds under the previous regime, whereas your code of conduct rules you want to apply under the new regime. So either you apply the old regime or you apply the new regime. And as I said, when you do so, that's absolutely up to you to decide. Maybe it makes sense for you to make an assessment which of the 2 regimes is more onerous. Actually, the new regime has quite some reliefs, so that it can definitely make sense to switch sooner than later to the new regime. But I think that's the first point which I want to make. Do make an analysis what it actually means for you, and then decide when you want to switch. As I said, there is no cherry picking. Switch at one point in time, but switch entirely. So you will switch from the rules which are set forth in this Collective Investment Schemes Act, or CISA, to the new Financial Services Act rules. Now, I will make to you, I'm sure you already know the rules under the previous regime. I explained them to you 2 years ago at the eMUPET show. Now I will explain to you how the new regime looks like. So everything that I will say now is actually under the new regime. So that means from the moment on that you decided to switch to the new regime. The most important point, or the most important change, and I'm sorry if this slide looks quite confusing, and it is confusing, and thanks to our parliament, I think it's overly confusing and more confusing than necessary. The most important point is that we have a client segmentation. Almost the same way as you know it under MiFID. So now I listed all possible client segmentations, all possible clients, and on the left-hand side, you see how they are segmentized or categorized under these new Financial Services Act rules. You see we have institutional clients, the ones on the top, so above the red line. These are the companies which are regulated under the supervised by FINMA. Then we have all the professional clients. That means these are those who are qualified but are not regulated. And on the bottom we have the private clients. Now, unfortunately, and I said it's confusing, unfortunately, this is only half of the truth. We have a client segmentation under the Financial Services Act, which applies to the financial services which you provide, but we still have another client segmentation under the Collective Investment Schemes Act. So, and when you distribute funds or when you offer funds, then you have to actually look at both of them. How a company or a target person is qualified under the Collective Investment Schemes Act, that's what you see on the right-hand side. There we just know the qualified investors and the non-qualified investor. That actually hasn't changed. So in the case you're already familiar with the Swiss rules, this is something that will continue to apply. And now we actually have to mix these both concepts for this presentation. That means we will have to look both at the qualification under the Financial Services Act and the qualification under the Collective Investment Schemes Act. Easy to say, of course, when we talk about private equity funds, I think the private clients or the non-qualified investors should not be your target. We will rather look at the professional clients and institutional clients under the Financial Services Act rules and at the qualified investors under the Collective Investment Schemes rules. Now, the rules, something that will continue to apply is we have rules which apply to the fund, and we have requirements which need to be satisfied by the distributing person or the offering person and entity. We have to look at these two rules separately. We will first together look at what does the fund has to satisfy. These are actually the rules under the Collective Investment Schemes Act, and we will then look at the requirements which need to be met by the distributing entity. And this will be the FINSA rules or the Financial Services Act rules. Now, as I said, we will first look the requirements that a fund has to satisfy. The slide you should be familiar with. We have, it has slightly changed as of 1st of January. On the very right-hand side, you see the non-qualified investors. If you want to distribute a fund or offer a fund to non-qualified investors, then you need to register with FINMA, Swiss representative, Swiss paying agent. I think it goes without saying that's not your route. Private equity funds cannot be registered, but they anyway do not make sense for qualified, for non-qualified investors. So I think we should rather look at the other two columns. We have the qualified investors. Maybe you then look briefly back at the client segmentation overview of the last page, which are actually almost all those clients which are regulated by FINMA or which are qualified by any other means. In general, there is no requirement anymore for them. They do not need to be registered with FINMA. There is no appointment of a Swiss representative. There is no appointment of a Swiss paying agent. There is just one exception, or let's say two exceptions: the high net worth individuals or the investment structures created for high net worth individuals. They can opt out. And if they opt out, then no registration with FINMA is required, but you will need a Swiss representative and a Swiss paying agent. In the case these two target persons, that means the high net worth individual and their investment structures, do not opt out, that would mean that they will be non-qualified investors. Maybe the two most important points or the most important target persons for you: insurance companies. Insurance companies are qualified. They are supervised by FINMA. They are licensed. So these are qualified investors. They fall into the left-hand column, in the left-hand basket. So in the case you want to offer your private equity fund or any other private market fund to an insurance company, then you do not need to be registered. The fund does not need to be registered with FINMA. No Swiss paying agent, no Swiss representative. The same actually applies to pension funds. That's new. Swiss pension funds, no paying agent, no representative is required anymore. So I think that's a big relief for many private equity fund managers. So in the case you offer your funds to pension funds only, then you do not need to have the Swiss representative and the Swiss paying agent anymore. Now, the high net worth individuals, I think that's the most important point. As I said, you still need the Swiss representative and the Swiss paying agent, but actually no registration with FINMA. Family offices, this is also something new. Family offices, the term is not a legal term under Swiss law. Most of these family offices qualify as asset managers under Swiss law. These asset managers are now regulated by FINMA or need to apply for a license by FINMA, what means the family office actually falls as well into the left-hand basket. Now, when we come again to high net worth individual, I think there it shows how tricky it is. That means if the high net worth individual is advised by a family office, or the high net worth individual has a family office, and you approach the family office, then actually make an offering activity to the family office. The family office is licensed, and as such, it is a qualified investor. That means you do not need to, the fund does not need to be registered with FINMA, of course not. No representative, no Swiss paying agent is required. In the case, however, that you approach the high net worth individual personally, so the person that you want to talk to him, so that means you make an offering activity to the person directly, not to the family office, to the high net worth individual directly. If the person does not make an opt-out in writing, then this high net worth individual is a non-qualified investor, and you are not allowed to distribute your private equity fund to this individual. If this high net worth individual makes an opting out, then actually you need to appoint a Swiss rep and a Swiss paying agent, and you can pursue your offering activities. And the same applies with investment structures. That means with trusts or foundations, investment companies set up for high net worth individuals. These as well, you need to have a Swiss representative and a Swiss paying agent. I think all in all, it shows that we have two very important addressees of offering activities for which the offering has become easier. These are the pension funds, no requirement anymore, and these independent asset managers, how they were called before, or external asset managers. These are now licensed, and as a consequence, they are qualified investors, and the same applies as for the pension funds. No rep and no Swiss paying agent is necessary. Now, that's actually what applies to the fund itself. Now, the other question is, what has the offering entity or the offering person to do? Can anyone just walk around, make presentations and so on, or is this limited to just a specific entity or not? If we look, of course, it can be that you have offering persons or placement agents or the like in Switzerland, or you can have them out of Switzerland. If the entity or if this offering person is in Switzerland and the entity is regulated by FINMA already, maybe you have an asset manager in Switzerland, or you mandate a bank with your placing activities, then actually no further registration is required. Why is that? Because the bank itself or the asset manager is already licensed, so they have already the license to make placement activities or offering activities. Any person, however, offering funds needs to affiliate with an ombudsman's office. An ombudsman's office is a little bit like an arbitration entity. The idea is that in the case you end up in a dispute, the ombudsman's office is a forum where you can hopefully easily find a solution. So that's mandatory for anyone. If the Swiss entity which carries out your offering activities is not regulated by FINMA, then two things are important. First of all, the employees which carry out the offering activity need to be registered with a advisors registry. That's a new institution that's set up, which satisfies certain quality enhancement. So they want to make sure that only persons get registered which can prove that they have the necessary experience and necessary experience and formation to satisfy quality requirements. So the employees need to be registered, and the entity itself needs to be affiliated with the ombudsman's office. So 2 points: the employees need to be registered, and the company needs to be affiliated with the ombudsman's office. If your entity, however, is outside Switzerland, so maybe you have offering persons located in Germany or in the UK or anywhere outside Switzerland, actually irrelevant of whether that's in the European Union or outside of the European Union, whether it's the States or somewhere else. So if this entity is a regulated entity, again, that means which is subject to an equivalent regulation as we assume it in Switzerland, then the same applies. The entity needs to be affiliated with a Swiss Ombudsman's office, but no registration, neither of the entity or of your employees, is required with FINMA or any other organization. So the Ombudsman's office is the only thing. If your foreign entity is not regulated, so maybe there are jurisdictions which where it is possible, then we have the same Swiss rules. The employees need to be registered with the advisors registry in Switzerland, and the company needs to affiliate with the Ombudsman's office. It's important, even an entity which is outside Switzerland can actually affiliate with an Ombudsman's office. So that means we have already now assessed under these Financial Services Act rules what the offering persons need to do for registration and affiliation. Now, similar to MiFID, and I think you see this, these new Swiss rules are actually more or less a little bit a copy of the MiFID rules. These offering persons have to satisfy certain code of conduct rules. We can summarize them. We have a duty to inform. We have a duty to run an appropriateness test. We have a duty to document and to render account. And we have a duty to be transparent and to care. So that means best execution. All these duties are set forth in this Financial Services Act. Not all of them are actually applicable to all clients. Maybe you remember at the beginning, I showed you this complicated list of client segmentation. And when you apply it, you see certain of these obligations or duties, which we see here, are not applicable to professional clients. And some of them are not applicable to institutional clients. So actually the institutional clients like banks and asset managers, insurance companies, these are those which are anyway sufficiently qualified. And it goes without saying that vis-a-vis these institutional clients, none of these offering duties, none of these duties actually applies. So that means you do not need to actually apply them. Having said that, I think it's still important to bear in mind that this is just a regulatory rule. Under the contract which you may have with your clients, there may still result certain obligations which you have to satisfy. So irrelevant of whether your client is an institutional client or a professional client. Now let's look at these different duties. Duty of information is the first duty. It's most likely the easiest of all these duties. What they want to make sure is it's the purpose of these duties that your counterparty or the person you talk to just knows who you are, how you're regulated, what you're doing, what kind of service you are offering, what kind of, whether you're independent or dependent. So you see exactly here the points which you have to disclose. And in most cases, the offering entities, they have a standardized document with which they actually provide these informations to their counterparties. So it's something that's actually easy to satisfy. You have a paper or a document which lists all this information. It's usually a one-pager, and you hand it over to your counterparty or the person you want to address your activity to. So it's easy to satisfy. Of course, when we look at institutional clients, none of this is necessary. The institutional client can itself decide or figure out who you are, what the services are. And the professional clients as well, they can actually waive this duty. The biggest change in Switzerland is actually that we have a appropriateness test and the suitability test, something that also comes from MiFID. Under Swiss law, we distinguish between the suitability test and the appropriateness test. As we only look at offering activities, we only have to question whether we have an appropriateness test. Now, there comes now a slightly complicated distinction. If you offer your fund without any investment advice, that means you make a pure presentation without advising your counterparty, no appropriateness test is necessary. However, if you do provide investment advice, so if you actually give advice to your counterparty on whether the specific fund is good or not, or whether it fits the portfolio or not, that means if you make an assessment of whether the fund is appropriate for the counterpart, then of course you have to do an appropriateness test. The appropriateness test is as the same way as you know it under MiFID rules. You have to assess the client's knowledge, the client's experience, and then you have to assess whether the financial instrument is appropriate for this person. I think, of course, you have to document and you have to prove that you did this appropriately. I think the most important point, try to avoid the appropriateness test by not giving any investment advice, but just by actually offering the fund itself without giving investment advice. That relieves you from quite a burden here, because as I said, if you offer your fund without investment advice, no appropriateness test is necessary. You have a duty of documentation. You have to document your contact with the counterparties. You have to document on what kind of financial service you agreed, of what kind of financial service you provided, of what kind of financial instrument you presented or you recommended. Of course, from a legal point of view, it makes sense that you keep this information well documented. In the case of a dispute, of course, it will be highly important to show what actually has been discussed and not. You may assume that most likely the counterparty does not make any documentation, so it's even more important that you have a documentation, because then you can prove what has been discussed or not. What needs to be disclosed? Under Swiss law, of course, we have to disclose so that the counterparty can actually request a disclosure of the client's file, or what we call a Kundendossier. That means the term is very broadly interpreted by the Swiss Federal Supreme Court already by the existing rules. So most likely you have to disclose actually everything except for some internal notes which you made, or internal marks, draft of documents and so on. But whatever you collect on your clients, you have to disclose. And I think knowing that you do have to disclose, or that you might come in the situation where you have to disclose, it makes sense to have a complete and concise client file where everything is documented what you did, so to prove that actually you performed your obligations in the correct way. Duty of transparency. At the end, you have to be transparent in what kind of services you did. You have to be transparent in how you are remunerated, what kind of compensation you get. You have to disclose that you satisfy the equal treatment requirement, so that all clients are treated the same way. And you also have to give the evidence that you performed actually best execution. In the pure offering activity, most likely best execution is not really a big issue, because at the end, the client decides what he wants to subscribe to or not, or what he wants to redeem or not. But in the case you also provide investment advice, or you provide even investment management services in Switzerland, then best execution is a hot topic. At the end, I think best execution is always something which is difficult. It is clear under new Swiss rules that best execution does not mean that it needs to be the cheapest, but it means that on an overall assessment with regard to cost, of course, timing, quality, you have to choose the best solution, and of course document it so that you can actually prove that you made the necessary assessment. This is a brief overview of the new rules. I hope this helped you. I think the most important points of which I want to remind you is, first of all, don't forget you have to switch. You have 2 years time to switch from the old rules to the new rules, and you decide when this shall happen. Second point, the pension funds do not need to have, so for offering to pension funds, no Swiss representative and no Swiss paying agent are required anymore. So that's really a relief, so that you do not need to, pay for these service providers anymore, just for the offering of funds or collective investment schemes to pension funds. And actually the same applies with investment and independent asset managers, which are now called asset managers. They are licensed by FINMA, and as such, they are qualified investors, and no paying agent and no representative are required. However, what we still need, representative and paying agent are still required for offering activities towards high net worth individuals and the investment structures set up for high net worth individuals. So there is no excuse. Okay, this is a brief overview of what's new on the Swiss law. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something. As I said at the start, in the case you have any questions, please contact me. It will be a pleasure to advise you on what's new on the Swiss law. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Bye.